Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's edition of our 7 Investing podcast, where it's our mission to empower you to invest in your future. I'm 7 Investing founder and CEO Simon Erickson, joined by my colleague, lead advisor Dana Abramovitz. We're going to be talking about science today. We're joined by Mei Hu. She is the CEO and co-founder of Vaxxinity, company in the life sciences sector that's tackling some really big problems. Mei, I'm really excited to chat with you this morning. Thanks for being a part of our podcast.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Like I said, we're going to jump into the nitty-gritty of the science. We're going to look at the serious conditions like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and COVID that your company is addressing. But maybe let's start at the very top. At the 10,000-foot level, your vision is to provide cheaper, safer, more convenient, and more effective medicines for chronic diseases for everyone. And the mission attached to that is to democratize health by pioneering the third biologic revolution. For anyone watching, Vaxxinity is publicly traded. VAXX is the ticker on that. Can you introduce us to your company first and foremost, Mei?
Yeah, of course. So thanks for summarizing it. I mean, basically, we have one North Star, which is to democratize health. And we plan on doing that by basically, bringing the efficiency of vaccines, which we've seen how remarkable they can be, particularly in this COVID pandemic, but bringing that efficiency of speed, scale, and accessibility to chronic diseases, which for the first time in history are now killing us more than anything else. So, we're doing this through a technology platform. And when you mentioned the third biologic revolution, the first one was vaccines, which helped, prevent over 27 diseases now. And the second biologic revolution were these things called monoclonal antibodies, these proteins, the kind of magic drug, which are now the top selling drugs in the world for chronic disease. But the problem is they're difficult to take and difficult to make and extremely expensive. So we're combining those two together with a technology platform and hopefully bringing transformative medicines all around the globe to every corner. So that's what we're planning.
And we'll bounce back and forth. I'm going to hand it to Dana. We'll jump back and forth on asking the questions. But Dana, I'll hand it to you to talk a little bit more about that technology.
Yeah, no, so I'd love to learn more. Our bodies have been, designed over millions of years to fight foreign objects, right? And vaccines take advantage of that. I'm curious, like with chronic diseases, the objects are, within our own bodies. So, I'd love to learn a little bit more about your technology and how you're using it to, vaccines to address chronic diseases and, our own body proteins.
Yeah. So you hit on something, which is that our immune system has been, is actually one of the most sophisticated machines ever created, and it's evolved over millions of years. And it naturally has all sorts of defenses against diseases. And one of them is the ability to produce antibodies. So traditionally, we think about it like in the COVID sense, producing antibodies to neutralize viruses, right? And help protect us against severe disease. It turns out that with chronic diseases, they're caused by things that our body produces itself. So what we call self-antigens, right? Heart disease would be caused by high cholesterol. So it's one of the early things. Alzheimer's is caused by toxic proteins that bundle up in your brain. It turns out that when you look at high-performing centenarians, the immune system actually does produce antibodies to neutralize against these also. So what we figured out to do is to really selectively activate parts of your immune system to produce antibodies against these specific proteins that are the agents and causes of chronic diseases. So with Alzheimer's, our vaccine is designed to produce antibodies that neutralize these toxic amyloid oligomers that build up in your brain as you age. With heart disease, it's something called PCSK9, which will have a regulatory impact on bad cholesterol. And so we teach the body to produce antibodies against that, which ultimately lowers cholesterol. It's not a new concept, right? It's just been extremely difficult to do. And what we've done is develop a technology over the last couple of decades that's figured out how to do it safely and consistently, which is why I think you'd be effective.
So can I ask a follow-up question about that? So when you have the antibody, it binds to whatever protein target you find, and then it just triggers a regular immune response and degrades the foreign material is that how it's working?
Yeah, so I think, Antibodies, once they neutralize the target, it will be washed away in your body in all sorts of mechanisms. But I think the trick is actually the production of the antibody in the first place. That's where the hard part is, because your body has something called immune tolerance, right? We're really smart. If we were to develop antibodies against ourselves, that's called autoimmune disease. So we have to be really careful about that. So I think that the really tricky part about it is, how do you get your body to develop antibodies against just a specific thing and not everything else, and not triggering all sorts of other immune responses like T cell inflammation? That's been one of the challenges with other vaccine technologies, is they haven't really been able to do what we do safely. So other programs have been halted mostly because of those impacts. We've been tested in 6 clinical trials now, and actually the technology was originally commercialized in animal health. So over 3 billion doses sold on the market to date. So, going back to your question, it's yes, once it neutralizes, it gets broken down and taken away, but the real trick is, how do you produce that thing in the first place?
I believe the approach you're taking is synthetic peptides, right? And looking through your technology, and it's very different than some of the other approaches out there, whether it's CRISPR or CAR-T. As you've mentioned in previous presentations I've seen, Mei, those are very expensive, pretty much uneconomical for most of the developing world out there. I did want to ask the commercial question tied to this, which is that it looks like Vaxxinity, spawned out of a company called United Biomedical, between United Neuroscience and then COVAX. And then now you guys have gone public here in November. Can you tell us about the genesis of your company and kind of how you got this royalty-free, commercialization rights to the platform that you have?
Yeah, so it's an organic story, which usually means it's much more complicated. The platform originally came out of Rockefeller University, mentored by a few Nobel laureates, and then incorporated into a company called United Biomedical. It was supported early on by NIH grants, and as I mentioned, commercialized into diagnostic and animal health applications first. So a few years ago, my husband and I, we spun out a company called United Neuroscience from there, of which United Biomedical was a major shareholder. That's how we got the first, royalty-free license to the technology for neurological diseases. That expanded to other chronic diseases. And then when the pandemic started, we started something called COVAX, basically to develop a vaccine for COVID-19. The truth was, no one knew whether COVID was going to stay around or not. So that's why we spun it into a separate entity. A year or two later, when we realized that, for better or for worse, unfortunately, COVID's not going away, we saw we had these 2 companies that were working on the same platform, basically the same team, same manufacturing, and COVID wasn't going away. So it made sense to merge the 2. And that's how Vaxxinity was born.
And then as my follow-up for that too, I saw that, Peter Diamandis was very interested in the COVID vaccine as well. Can you talk a little bit? He's a rock star, just like you are, but globally, people that are into life sciences immediately know who he is among space exploration and other things too. But can you talk a little bit about kind of his involvement or the role that he has in Vaxxinity now?
Yeah, so he's like you said, a rock star, like totally exponential thinker, visionary. He goes for moonshots, and is probably one of the reasons why commercial space flight exists today. He saw kind of the vision that we had. He recognized the potential, the legitimacy of the science, and he has been a huge supporter, right? He realized that this is an exponential transformative technology. So he helped found Vaxxinity, and is currently on our board today. So, he is all in on our moonshot to vaccinate the world against heart attack and stroke, basically. It's incredible support.
Dana, I'll hand it back over to you if you wanted to talk about the pipeline.
Sorry, it took a second to unmute. So yeah, no, just like super cool. Peter is amazing. And, just the vision and just, you said the legitimacy of the science and, just the belief that this can happen and just making things happen. And so, you're tackling a lot of different diseases. You have a very impressive pipeline. How did you choose to, target such difficult diseases? I mean, like you talk about Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. They're diseases that, many companies have been trying to, work against and, just haven't been successful. How did you choose those? And then, like what specifically, proteins are you targeting? How are you doing that? How are you testing, to see how that's going? And then, how is it working? How's it going? We'd love to hear about that.
Yeah. So one of the benefits of having a platform is that you can go after a lot of things. And one of the drawbacks is that you can't do everything, and you realize that. So you focus on what you're good at and then try to leverage off of others. And so even though what we are doing seems, crazy disruptive, we're actually taking a pretty de-risked approach to it. Alzheimer's was our first shot on goal. And in fact, it came at a time where we really wanted to prove see what the platform could do in humans. There was another vaccine at the time that was developed by Elan in collaboration with J&J. And even though it showed good signs of efficacy, it had to be halted because of safety issues, right? And at the time, we were a bunch of vaccinologists, not neurologists, but we saw that and we said, you know what? We know how to solve that problem. We know how to break immune tolerance safely, and we wanted to show that we can do it. And that was actually the origination of how we got into Alzheimer's. It turns out it's better to be lucky than smart, and we pushed that program forward, and we got really beautiful results. So for Alzheimer's, itself, we've now been through a phase 1 and a phase 2A. We've tested on Alzheimer's patients, early Alzheimer's patients, and even though it's not statistically significant because it's not, hundreds and hundreds of patients, what we're seeing is that we can slow what appears to be slow the cognitive decline by about 50% across all these different endpoints. And with that, encouraging data, we also went into Parkinson's, which has a very similar, pathological phenomena where there are these toxic proteins. They're misfolded proteins that aggregate in the brain and begin causing damage, right? So that program is also in the clinic. Now, once those programs started working, we started looking at really well-validated targets. So where a monoclonal already exists on the market, where we understand the biology, that it knows that it works, and where we have a benchmark to know exactly what we have to hit to show efficacy in patients. So 2 examples are this one thing called CGRP for migraine, for chronic migraineurs, right? There's monoclonals on the market, there's an oral on the market, but what we're trying to develop is a vaccine that can be the baseline, right, for long durability. So instead of taking a pill every day or a shot every month that you have to inject yourself, think about if you just went in to your doctor's office, 2 or 4 times a year, really, and then you have this long durable relief, right? That's migraine. Another one is for high cholesterol called PCSK9. There are a lot of drugs on the market right now, right? There are 2 monoclonals and inclisiran on it as well. The problem is that they're expensive, and so they're late line treatments. You have to fail other treatments to get there. So even though the biology is really well validated and consistent, these drugs, because of their expense and the difficulty of taking them, become late line treatment. And so what we wanted to do was say, hey, let's go into this target where we can show efficacy and we know that it translates well, but let's try to go after first line because of basically our cost, convenience, and accessibility profile. So that's kind of how we got into these, Dana. And we're excited because, we're expanding the portfolio, but in a thoughtful way, because we realize we don't have the stomach to digest everything.
Yeah, it's so smart. I didn't think of that, just going after the targets that are already known through the monoclonals. Is brilliant. I love smart companies, and I love companies that are doing good. And so this goes back to your mission of equity and making really expensive drugs available for everybody using processes that are cheaper. So which is brilliant. Really, really nice.
Well, thank you. We're excited about it.
Let's see. and so I have another question. Oh yeah, so like with clinical trials, then you mentioned that you have some things in phase 1 and phase 2. A lot of times when we're talking to we're talking about drug companies, to investors, we talk about like how the drug development process is time consuming, it's risky, it's expensive. I'm just wondering how your clinical trials are going, and the approach that you're taking of targeting, now that I know targeting those proteins that already have monoclonal antibodies, is that making your process easier or more challenging? Are you able to use that data? Is that helpful? Just curious, if you're having any challenges or benefits from the approach that you're taking.
Yeah, so the answer is both, right? I hate to be a lawyer about it, but it depends. So the cool thing is that our mechanism of action is out of a vaccine, right? Where instead of making these antibodies in giant vats and billion-dollar facilities outside and then passively infusing, we're getting your body to be the antibody factory. But the way that we test in clinical trials is very similar to other therapeutics, because that's what we are. So the great part about going after targets that have already been validated is that there's a defined regulatory path already. And so we know what people did before us in order to, get their label and approval. And so having that kind of pathway already defined really de-risks and accelerates our clinical development pathway. So that's what we're doing for, migraine and hypocholesterolemia, as well as for Alzheimer's, because, there's a set path. Now, it's interesting because with the vaccine, we can go beyond where a monoclonal can, and mainly that's in prevention. So it's not just sick care, but it's actually real health care, right? Because only with a vaccine can you practically and meaningfully go into prevention and try to intervene with the disease before symptoms appear. Now, the challenge is that these trials are more complicated and they take more time and money. So for Alzheimer's, even though we can go into treatment like others have, we're looking for partnerships because prevention trials do take longer. And you really want someone. Now, the irony is that the probability of actually being successful is likely higher in prevention because you're intervening earlier before the disease has a chance to really set in. But it is more complicated. And so even though the field is moving in that direction, that's actually where, because of the extra complications, we're looking for partners, particularly in those assets.
Mei, can you talk a little bit about COVID? This is such a relevant topic right now. For those of us who are non-scientists, can you tell us, how you think about this virus and how you approach controlling it, preventing it?
So COVID is fascinating because it's still everywhere and it affects everyone, and yet we're all fatigued by it, right? So, investors are fatigued by it, people are fatigued. We would just like it to go away. The problem is it's not going away. It's staying with us, right? And so as a result, there's still big opportunity and unmet need. And, I was just recently at the White House. I was honored to be there talking about next generation vaccines. And what we're looking at is, can we get a vaccine that one can really kind of address multiple variants, current and future variants? Can we increase durability, right? So instead of having a booster, every 3 months or 6 months, can we, increase the amount of time that it's protective? And then when we're looking at LMIC countries, low and middle income countries, there's still a big question for distributability, right? Cold chain. Can you do it in normal cold chain and not require extra cold freezers? The last thing that I see, which is something that I saw kind of in animal health, is that safety really matters, right? If you had a choice between taking something that made you sick versus not, all other things being equal, I would like to think that, you'd like to take the thing that didn't make you sick. It would be the one, at least, that I would give my kids and loved ones. So those are the challenges and opportunities that I see. And those are actually the things that we're working on. So we have a COVID vaccine called UB612. It's in the clinic right now. In fact, it's in a global phase 3 approval study, registration study. And we're testing and to see if it can boost other platforms. So if you've had mRNA vaccine before, if you've had an inactivated vaccine before, can we boost you to get protective levels of titers? And that's what we're going to read out in the second half of this year and aim to get an approval off of.
That's fantastic. I wanted to change gears a little bit, talk about, you just came public. IPO was, I believe, last November. Congratulations, by the way. For those that are interested, it is a publicly traded company. Vaxxinity is VAXX is a ticker for that. Maybe you raised $85 million, last year. I wanted to ask, our audience is investors or individual investors that are really interested in innovative things like you all are doing. What do you want to use the money for? What do you want to expand the company to do next in the next year, 2 years, 3 years?
We're just focusing on executing and getting good data readouts, right? So we're going to be being at the COVID vaccine that I was just talking about. So hopefully becoming a revenue generating company. But the other ones is we have, 4 major shots on goal that we're using that money for. And we want to make sure that they all have a chance to play out. So we got a readout in our Parkinson's vaccine later this year. We have a readout in our migraine vaccine that's going into the clinic right now, early next year. And, we just announced non-human primate data for our cholesterol vaccine, and we're going into the clinic with that. And so we're hoping to see some results from that next year. So the money that we raise is really going to progressing our pipeline. And I always tell everyone I meet, IPO is just a step in the road towards achieving our North Star. It's a financing event. And, the technology and mission give us the conviction to do the right thing. And I'm confident the rest will follow.
I love that. Just your North Star of doing the right thing. And now with the funding raise to be able to make that happen. Just a couple days ago, we had a new healthcare bill that was just signed into law. And it helped in being able to negotiate drug prices and the cost of drugs, is something that, we've been talking about for years, decades. And, your mission is to make, pretty expensive drugs that, drugs that are typically really expensive. I'm curious, with this new law, and hopefully you can still hear me. With this new law, being a CEO of a publicly traded company, there's extra pressure from investors, from the street, to do things. How is that influencing you, as you're focused on meeting your mission and aiming at your North Star? How do you not get distracted by all the other things that are happening now that you're a publicly traded company?
So I think that's the job of a leader, which is to make sure we stay focused on what our North Star is. And that's the purpose of the North Star, right? No matter what is going on outside, you got one direction that you're going in. In terms of the bill, listen, I applaud the desired outcome of the bill, right, to lower drug pricing. And it's completely aligned with our mission. So, it actually doesn't affect us. It's actually good for us in the sense that as more reform happens, people are going to have to lower prices, which is where we were all along. Now, this is my own personal opinion, but the bill is big, then it gives negotiation rights. But I've always been a proponent that in order to make big things happen, you want to set the parameters about the outcome, not the guideposts, right? So going to the moon, right? The Manhattan Project, getting a vaccine for polio. Heck, getting a vaccine for COVID, right? We didn't say, hey, let's negotiate. You have to take this process. You have to take this process. We said, this is what we want, right? We want lower price drugs. Why don't we, say that and challenge folks to deliver cheaper drugs like vaccines for chronic diseases, like invest in technologies that will get you there. That's what, I think ultimately is going to have to happen. But that's not to denigrate this bill, which is actually a big step in terms of, balancing the playing field in terms of negotiating power. But ultimately, I think true innovation comes from, actually driving innovation, not the process around innovation.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Yeah, I'm going to try not to get on my soapbox, but that could be a totally different.
It's fascinating, May. I mean, all the things that you've described about innovation, the approach you're taking to these endogenous, diseases, the immune response, it's hard to get to train the body to attack itself in the ways that you need it to without having off-target effects. Like you said, I applaud the efforts you're taking to not only just do this, but also do it in a way that's easy to distribute to other countries. It's affordable for them. There's a whole bunch of things with the platform you're doing. They're awesome. I think it's really cool. I've also seen your presentations at Singularity University. I think that, you are a bigger picture thinker. And I think as my last question for you, I'd like to kind of ask you to look into your crystal ball and everything that you know about healthcare and everything that you've done along this journey. I mean, we're, in terms of distribution, in terms of, all the different challenges that face the world today, where do you see healthcare going in maybe 5 or 10 years from
now? Listen, I think 5 and 10 years is always a funny thing. Someone once said, you end up doing a lot less than you think you can do in a year, but doing a lot more than you think you could in 10 years, right? Ultimately, where I want to see healthcare going is moving towards, healthcare, right? Preventive medicines. And I think that we can bring the third biologic revolution in. We don't have to do it ourselves. I think other people can help, but we're, pioneering the idea. But I think that, just like today, we go in and get checked for cholesterol. And if we're, high, we go put on statins. I'd like to think that, in 10 years, we go in and we get checked for all sorts of things. We get checked for, amyloid and tau in our brain, alpha-syn, these other biomarkers for migraine. And we say, hey, you know what, if you're high, let's put you on a vaccine now and prevent that disease from happening. And we just keep monitoring you on a yearly basis. And so I think preventive healthcare is really the way to a healthy society. And I think we have all the tools today to get there. We just have to put them together. So diagnostics and blood-based biomarkers are coming around, and this ecosystem didn't exist 20 years ago, right? We have new technologies of being able to see in the brain. We have, this technology that we're developing of vaccines for chronic diseases. This is coming out and being proven in the clinic right now. So all the pieces are there. We just have to put them together and keep charging ahead. So that's where I see life in 10 years. And hopefully by then, we will be well on our way to vaccinating the world against things like heart attack and stroke.
Dana, I'll give you the last question. If there's anything you want to add, I know you're a big fan of personalized medicines and value-based healthcare. Seems like a mission that you are certainly on board with as well.
No, I think it's wonderful. Yeah, I don't think I have any other questions. I would just, love to be able to continue the conversation. Definitely follow up and monitor your progress and see what you're doing. Healthcare's hard to disrupt, for real. It's really hard, and it's just great to see somebody who has the vision and is actually working to make it happen. I've seen a lot of companies, do something and they were just so too far ahead, and they didn't make it happen. And it's great to see that you're, you have that vision and you're making progress. And I'm looking forward to watching and seeing you reach your goals.
Well, thank you, Dana. It's a big vision, but I think we're taking lots of little bites on how to get there. It's like someone used to say, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So we got lots of data catalysts coming up, and each step is one step closer to getting where we are. And as I mentioned, this is disruptive, what we're trying to do, but we're doing it in a very de-risked way, with the validated technology, with well-validated targets, and we'll get there. We have the conviction to not stop.
Well, once again, Mei Hu is the co-founder and CEO of Vaxxinity, VAXX, for those who are interested in the publicly traded company, taking a disruptive approach to treating and preventing actually some very serious conditions. Mei, it's a real pleasure. Thanks for joining us on the 7 Investing podcast this morning.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Dana. It was great.
On behalf of my colleague, Dana Abramovitz, I'm Simon Erickson. Thank you for tuning in to this edition of our 7 Investing podcast. We are here to empower you to invest in your future. We are 7 Investing.